what? That doesn't make sense. So then I ran the test again. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today will be a very interesting one because I'm going to be comparing this M1 MacBook Air, which came out over a year ago, to this brand new, fully spec'd out M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro. So in this video, I wanted to talk about my experiences as a photographer and videographer using these machines and how they've either helped or hindered my creative workflow. This is a base model MacBook Air with zero upgrades at all, with only 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of SSD versus the MacBook Pro with 64 gigs of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage. So on the M1 Max MacBook Pro, we have HDMI, 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an SD card slot, headphone jack, and of course, MagSafe. On the MacBook Air, we have two ports and a headphone jack. That is my biggest critique of the MacBook Air so far, is the lack of ports. And why this is such a big deal is if you're doing anything creative, likely you're probably plugging in an external hard drive. And what's really frustrating is if you want to charge your laptop at the same time, that already occupies one of those slots. So it's really frustrating sometimes. Now comparing the size, obviously the 16-inch is much larger, but that size difference really comes into play here when you look at the side. On the MacBook Air, we have that classic wedge shape, which I actually really enjoy. It feels extremely portable because it's so light and it's so comfortable to sit on a lap or rest your arms on, and the 16-inch is a chonky boy. But if you've seen my review video, I actually talk about why bigger is better. We have more room for more internals, bigger battery, bigger fans, etc. So with the trade-off of increased internals, I'm okay with the bigger size on the MacBook Pro. If I were traveling with something, obviously the MacBook Air would be way lighter and a lot more comfortable. Although we should mention this, that the MacBook Pro does have fans inside. They rarely turn on, and when they do, they're barely noticeable. Huge win as far as what they've made here. Both of these devices have Touch ID. The Touch ID key on the MacBook Pro is larger. That doesn't really affect anything, but just pointing that out here. The trackpad on the MacBook Pro is also larger. The MacBook Air still has their typical 720p webcam, which is kind of a bummer, but now we're finally seeing 1080 in the MacBook Pro. And again, in most of these comparisons, it will seem that the 16-inch is just screaming better quality. We'll get to all the nitty-gritty details and which is actually better, because the biggest factor is cost. But I have a lot to say on that later. Moving on to the screens. Again, obviously the 16-inch will probably be way better than the MacBook Air, as it is larger, and I've said this in my previous review video, this is probably the best screen we've ever seen in a laptop by a long shot. With the inclusion of mini LED, we can see that the contrast between whites and blacks are a lot darker, and comparing the bezel sizes, it almost feels like offensively large on the MacBook Air now that I've been used to the MacBook Pro. Continuing the topic of screens, now that they've included ProMotion into the MacBook Pro, this is obviously the clear winner, as everything will feel buttery smooth with this 120Hz display. Okay, so we've already established that there's a ton of glaring differences between these two, and it's already sounding like the 16-inch just blows the MacBook Air out of the water, but you'd be so surprised. Now to some real life tests. Like I mentioned before, I'm a photographer and videographer. I create content for brands and myself for a living, so to me, it's extremely important to have a device that can keep up with what I'm doing. So for these tests, here's what I'm doing. As for photography, I've imported 145 megapixel pictures from my Canon R5, threw on an edit with at least 2 masks, and then exported. The MacBook Air, exporting these 100 high-resolution images took 9 minutes and 3 seconds. And the M1 Max MacBook Pro, exporting these 100 high-resolution images, took 3 minutes and 50 seconds, which is a 42% improvement. I'll be honest, I was expecting this to be faster anyway, as most should because it costs so much to upgrade everything, but export times aren't everything. So what is it like to actually edit photos on both of these devices? I'll be honest, as far as editing photography on both of these devices feel very comparable. They both feel perfectly smooth, perfectly snappy. I don't feel like I have to wait at all to see the changes that I'm making. I would say the difference between these as far as editing performance is very similar. Okay, now we'll get to exporting video, and here's where things get really interesting. So in Final Cut Pro, I have this video that's just shy of 5 minutes, and everything is filmed in 4K. The MacBook Air exporting this 5-minute 4K video took 2 minutes and 15 seconds. which I felt was, totally fine. That's fine for an export. Then I took those exact same project files and exported them from my MacBook Pro, exporting the same 5-minute 4K video, which took 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Only 7 seconds faster. And I was like, whoa. What? How is... That doesn't make sense. So then I ran the test again. That just didn't seem right. So I have the project files running through an SSD. So instead I moved everything directly onto the SSD of the MacBook to see if that was maybe doing something. I don't know. I just wanted to see what would happen. I exported again and got 2 minutes and 5 seconds, only a 3-second difference. So between the two, exporting this 5-minute 4K video, the difference was almost negligible, with less than 10 seconds of a difference. I was so confused because I was either extremely disappointed in my MacBook Pro or really impressed with the MacBook Air. Props to the MacBook Air, I guess. So does that mean that the MacBook Air is just as good? I'll be honest, no. I find the experience of editing on the MacBook Air kind of frustrating, which is unfortunate, but if you were doing stuff in 1080, I would say that it would be flawless as far as video editing. But when it comes to 4K, it does hesitate and pause, and it's not as smooth as it really should be. But I would say that you would probably have a little bit of a frustrating experience if video was your main thing here. Okay, so what does this mean? What is the sum of everything that we've learned here? I was so shocked by these results, especially with the video exports. And let's be clear here, we're not stating which laptop is better than the other, because the MacBook obviously has a lot more features, but we're talking about which one is better for you and your situation. Honestly, my recommendation for most people would still be the MacBook Air. Coming in at less than $1,000 and sometimes $800 on sale, this laptop packs a really powerful punch considering how cheap it is. It's extremely unlike Apple to make something that's really good and affordable. I mean, sorry Apple, but that's the truth. The MacBook Pro is a beast of a machine, but it also comes with a beast of a price tag. If you are even a tiny bit hesitant to spend that much money on a MacBook Pro, then don't. I really mean it when I say that the M1 MacBook Air really knocks it out of the park as far as how much it costs. But I can still see the M1 MacBook Air being perfect for most other people, especially college students. It's extremely affordable, extremely portable, lightweight, great battery, and again, if you're not doing professional work, this is kind of a no-brainer. Even for photographers, you can 100% get by. So what this video all boils down to is, what are your needs? Because I can't fully recommend getting this spec'd out MacBook Pro. I think it's overkill for most people, including myself. And I'm really excited to see what Apple does next as far as their MacBook Air lineup, because I've been really impressed with this little guy. If you have any things that you would like me to test, go ahead and drop those in the comments below. If you like this video, like it. It actually makes a difference. Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.